So we are up and running. Thanks for joining us on our town hall meeting. I want to introduce to you Vicky Petrone. Vicky is with Baird, Mandalas, and Brockstedt. She has been a longtime member of ABC with a couple other law firms as well. Serves on our Legislative and Legal Rights Committee. Has done many seminars for us here at ABC on legal issues over the years. So we're really pleased to have Vicky with us today. And I think you'll get a lot of information from her during this presentation. So Vicky, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Ed. So in addition to the chat button, you guys can use that. If you want, though, this is a smaller group. I know we're going to publish this to the greater membership, but if you have questions, you can, I don't know, Ed, did you mute them or are they muted? They're self-muting.
They're self-muted, so if they want to, they can unmute themselves.
Yeah, if you want to, just jump in, because I want this to be helpful to everyone. And I'm sure if you have a question, other people that are going to be listening to will also. So feel free to stop me anytime if you want more information or want a question. So let's get started. All right, so again, the people we have on this call are, pretty advanced, and a lot of this is going to be preaching to the choir, but the thing I wanted to start talking about today is delay. And so, construction delays related to COVID-19. And we know that your performance may be delayed to government restrictions. Delaware is pretty loose with the construction continuing. Pennsylvania was pretty restrictive. All construction was deemed non-essential except for healthcare and emergency repairs. And you could get exemptions, but it was pretty restrictive. So you've got government restrictions that could have slowed you down. Even in Delaware, though, where construction was allowed, the job could have been shut down due to exposure. You may have been on or heard about the Petrone DuPont group. I'll click on them as an example because I don't think we have anyone on the phone from there. Where 2 workers at least were tested positive, so that job site had to be shut down for a time period. Travel restrictions could have prevented you or your employees. A lot of folks have employees that live in Maryland, and Maryland had some significant restrictions. So getting your employees to Delaware to work. I work with a lot of clients where we had to develop placards for their trucks so that they could show that they were essential workers in Delaware to get here, but some other folks had trouble. You could have people out with the virus because of being sick or under 14-day quarantine due to suspected exposure or dealing with sick family members. And then we've got supply chain disruptions that could have impacted you. So material delivery delays for the same reason they can't get to Delaware, or restrictions on the personnel at the point of origin. We can't work wherever the factory is, so there's a delay getting the materials to the job. And then another thing we saw is government agency and inspections. Agency inspections were slowed. They were under restrictions here, so getting the inspectors out to your job sites, that may have impacted you as well. So all these may have gone into causing impact. So if you have an impact, you want to review, always go to the contract. You want to review your schedule terms, the force majeure terms, any time limits in your contract on making a claim if you have to, and then any damage limitations. So we'll go through each of those. So first, you're going to start looking at your schedule, and this is a sample schedule clause that I actually wrote. So it's pretty restrictive in favor of the client that I wrote it for, and it says that the contractor has the right to modify the schedule, to suspend it, to accelerate it. Pretty much the contractor can do anything they want to the schedule, and you've got to follow it. You want to look at what your contract schedule says in terms of the ability for Pet Narrow or the owner to deal with that schedule. And can they compress it? Can they accelerate it? Is that within their control? And then we'll go on to see, what kind of excuses, what kind of extensions can you get. So first you start with your actual schedule and then what the contract says about the schedule. So when you're going to look at your, what's the impacts that you've had, is there actual delay that you have to your work that isn't concurrent? And so concurrent delay is going to be a delay that's happening at the same time as the delay you're experiencing due to the COVID issue. So, for example, if you are impacted from the delay, but at the same time you were delayed on the job because you didn't get your submittals in, and there's a long lead time on a delivery item, you can't get an extension for the COVID issue because you had a concurrent delay that was your fault. And so the contract and the law isn't going to allow you to blame it all on COVID because you also caused the delay due to something else you did that was within your control. You want to look at, is there a delay that isn't a concurrent delay? Is it strictly related to this issue? And is it something that's on the critical path? So, is it something, an item that's within the float, so that the delay isn't going to matter, but is it really going to impact the critical path of the job? So then we're going to look at, is the delay excusable? Is the delay compensable? And what is the difference between those? So excusable delay is your performance time, the delay in your performance is excused. So you're not going to be penalized. And penalized with something like liquidated damages or consequential damages. So a lot of contracts have a clause that say, if they don't penalize you with liquidated damages per day or per week, they could say you are liable for all the consequences that your delay caused. And the best example we always talk about is the Petrone Sands Atlantic City Hotel project, where the owner was awarded $16 million in lost profits because of about a 6-month delay. So if the delay isn't excused, in that case it wasn't an excused delay, there's consequential damages or liquidated damages applied. So those can be huge. So you definitely want the delay to be excusable. But then the other issue is the delay compensable? So compensable means you're going to get paid for the costs you incur as a result of the delay. So now we want to look at, okay, what does your contract say about what's excusable, what's compensable? And so we start with the AIA contracts because that's a pretty standard force majeure clause, we call it. And force majeure is just a French word, and it means superior force. So it means something that can't be anticipated or controlled. And so if we look at the language, if the contractor is delayed by, and then we go to part 3 is the key part, labor disputes, fire, unusual delay, blah, 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 or other causes beyond the contractor's control. And that's really where we are. There are some force majeure clauses like this one from a proprietary contract that actually talks about epidemic. So this was, pretty interesting to go back and see that they had included that. And this was written way before COVID-19 happened. And so this one specifically includes an epidemic as a force majeure excuse for performance. So again, the AIA documents, pretty standard language. Proprietary documents, contracts usually have similar language. And it's going to say something like causes beyond the contractor's control. So if there's a delay caused by something beyond your control, it's probably going to be excused. And one of the things that this is based on not only the contract language, if your contract doesn't have a force majeure clause, and again, most of them do, but if it doesn't, you can also argue impossibility. Like performance is impossible. It's impossible for me to perform because my whole crew is out sick with COVID-19, or the government isn't letting me leave my house. Impossibility is an excuse to delay the contract performance time as well. So the next thing we want to look about is, is it excusable? Does your contract have a force majeure clause? And then, okay, well, if I'm going to make a claim and I'm going to claim, that I need more time, what does my contract say about when I have to file a claim? What is the time limit? So usually it's 7 days, although the AIA contract says 21 days. So this is a standard term. The claims must be initiated within 21 days after the occurrence of the event giving rise to the claim. This is whether you're claiming delay, any other claim, change order, anything is going to fall under this clause in the AIA or the similar clause in your contract. So you've got to look and see, when does the contract require me to initiate and put the owner on notice of the claim. This is another one, two other clauses. A here, this is from a client that I recently reviewed a contract for, and this provides that unless provided otherwise, you have to give notice within 3 days. When I see this 3 days, I always change it to 7. You can't do anything in 3 days. What happens if it happens, the issue comes up Friday morning and you don't provide notice until Tuesday, you're waived. You're foreclosed for making the claim. So just as a practice point, outside of delay when you're reviewing your contracts, 3 days is too short a time of anything. You could change it to 3 business days, but I always change it to 7 days or longer. And then below that, I've given you another excerpt from Whiting Turner's contract. Again, notice shall be given to the contractor no later than 7 days. So these are all pretty standard terms. Although this one has an extra caveat, which says, unless the general contract between the owner and the contractor is less than 7 days, in which case you have to do whatever the owner contract says. So to the subcontractors that are on the call, this always comes up when you're entering into a contract with the GC. It's always going to obligate the subcontractor to the obligations that the general contractor owes to the owner. And so you always want to make sure that you get a copy of that owner contract so that you know what your restrictions are, what your obligations are, what your time limits are, so that you can follow them. And if you can't get the copy of that schedule, then you make sure you carve yourself out. You're not going to be obligated to do a contract that you don't have. Or you can make a provision that says something like, if there are any conflict between the documents, the notice provisions in the subcontract agreement will govern. You can exclude anything upstream specifically, but you want to make sure you have a handle on what that might be. So these timelines are enforceable, whether it's 3 days or 7 days or 21 days, whatever it may be. They're enforceable deadlines, and there's a case in Delaware, a lawsuit and a written decision that's really clear, especially if it construed the AIA 21-day notice. And that is, if you don't give notice within that timeline, you are barred from pursuing the claim later. So you want to make sure you meet the timelines. The one thing that always comes up is, what happens if I don't know what the number is? I know I've been delayed, but the delay is continuing. Or I know I have a change order, but I don't have a handle on the total number yet. That's okay. You just have to put the GC or GC to owner, whoever you're working for, on notice that, hey, I've got an issue. I'm working on coming up with the numbers, but here I know it's going to be an issue, and we're formulating a price, or we will give you a price once we've figured out what the delay is, or we'll know what the impact is once the restrictions are lifted. Whatever the case may be, that's okay. If you're incapable of putting a dollar to the claim at the time, within the time limit, it's okay, as long as you give them the notice within the period of time that you're required to do it. Okay, so we talked about having a claim and making sure we give notice within the time period under the contract. And then now we figure out, okay, well, is it a delay that I'm going to be excused for, right? Which means the schedule is going to be extended for the period of the delay, or can I get paid for it? So first we look at excusable delay. Is the delay excused? And again, we go back to the contract. And this is the clause we looked at before from the AIA. Before we looked at this part, which said, if there's an extension requested because of a cause beyond the contractor's control. Okay, well, what happens if it's a cause beyond the contractor's control? Then I've highlighted this part. Then the contract time shall be extended for such reasonable time as the architect may be determined. Okay, so, what is reasonable? What are you going to have put together? What is reasonably related to the delay that you have explained? If you make an appropriate case for that, then the period of time is going to be extended commensurately. And reasonable time as the architect may determine. I mean, maybe you're going to disagree with the architect and that becomes a claim later. But the bottom line is here there's entitlement to extend the period of time if it's due to a cause beyond your control. Now, we know we can have an excuse for the delay. so that we're not going to get liquidated damages or consequential damages, anything against you as the claiming party. But what if you also have a claim for increased costs associated with that delay? So you could have a claim for field labor due to extended performance time, right? You're out on the job for longer than you expected. Maybe the schedule's accelerated to meet the original deadline, so we're going to compress your work to get it done to meet the original deadline. Again, now we go back to that other clause where the owner contractor was able to accelerate the schedule without any impact to you. In other words, you couldn't make a claim for it, so you'd have to go back and look at that. But you may have been impacted cost-wise in this way. The project could have been disrupted, which impacted your productivity, and now you're inefficient. Maybe, we've got to do 6 feet apart, right? And we'll talk about that in a little while. Once we're back on the job, we have to work 6 feet apart. The job's got to shut down for cleaning, hourly. I can't use the hoist with other people, things like that. And now I'm inefficient, so it's taking me longer. That's going to cause costs for you. Maybe you have idle labor because you're waiting around for other people, or you're waiting for the hoist to be used. You've got to wait your turn. Or you've got to demobilize and leave because we're staggering shifts, things like that. Maybe because you're waiting for material, there may be some escalation cost that's being passed on to you. And then home office overhead, that's something that comes up a lot. If we are on a long period of delay, your home office costs are usually distributed over all the jobs you have. Maybe the period is so long and you're idle for so long that you don't have absorbed home office costs. So you want to try to recover those. So these are all types of things that you may have financially experienced an impact because of the delay. So now, are they compensable? Right? Our favorite, Jerry Maguire. Can we get paid? Show me the money for the costs that we have. Go back to the contract. What does the contract say about the kinds of damages we get? And this is where we hear about the dreaded no damages for delay clause. Okay. And so here's an example of one. The extension of time is the sub's sole and exclusive remedy, meaning you don't get any damages if you're delayed. All you get is an extension of time. So again, we go back to schedule gets pushed out, that's okay, you're excused. There's no liquidated damages, there's no consequential damages. You don't get paid for any of those increased costs due to staffing, acceleration, inefficiencies, any of those things. You want to look at, does your contract have a no damages for delay clause or some other type of restriction that will prevent you from getting paid for the delay you've experienced? So, in summary on this point is, have you been impacted by a delay? You want to go back and review your contract schedule. Do you have a force majeure clause that will let you go because of situations beyond your control? Or can you claim impossibility? And that's okay too if you don't have something in your contract that specifically allows you to. What are your notice requirements? How fast do you have to get notice of that claim in? And I've seen clients so far preemptively just sending in a notice, just saying, hey, COVID's happening, if you didn't notice, we might be impacted. Owner, we're just putting you on notice that we may have a claim. You don't have to do that because you're not actually making a claim, but I have seen people do that proactively. You want to look at your notice requirements. What's the time that you've got to make the claim? And what does your contract say regarding extensions? We looked at that excusable delay period. Is the owner or GC allowed to do whatever they want with the schedule? And then we look at a no damages for delay or any other clause that may restrict our ability to claim impact costs. And the bottom line is document, document, document. And we say that with delay claims, with change order claims, with everything. Just document it as best you can. The impact of the claim, the time it's taking you, make sure you have a good series of communications with whoever you're working for. If there's if you can bring it up in meeting minutes, you want to do that. Emails count, written notices, according to the notice requirements count. As much documentation as you can put out there, you always want to do. So that's a quick summary on delay claims. Anybody have anything? Ed, do we see anything on this point before we move on to just a couple other random topics associated with COVID? Nothing. I answered everyone's
Anything
questions.
big? I think we're good.
Good. Okay. Okay. So a couple other things is impacts and preparation for the post-COVID-19 world. So the Committee 100, Delaware Prosperity Partnership, and some other business groups have been doing these business surveys across Delaware. And it's, again, preaching to the choir. This is stuff everyone on this call knows and is living. But 82% of those responding, it was a pretty large number of responsive businesses across 2 surveys. 82% of the businesses reported that their revenues have dropped. And that's across all industries. That's just not construction. 17% of the collective workforce has been laid off. 34 report decreased staffing, decreased capacity, 25 almost percent reduction in goods and services. Respondents indicate they could survive the current slowdown for 12 weeks, but that's an average. There were a lot of respondents that said, 4 weeks or less. 39% of those respondents said they applied for a loan, and about 2/3 of those were successful. And then 61% applied for the PPP with an average grant of $400,000. I think that the number in Delaware is much higher than that because people don't want to report that they requested or got it. Delaware received over $1 billion in the first round of the PPE financing and $400 million in the second round. And I think as of last reporting last week, there's still $100 million available to Delaware businesses under that PPP loan program. So I think this number's a lot higher than 61. So a couple issues with the PPP loan, and frankly, this could be its own seminar, but just a couple things I wanted to talk about. In terms of, right, we all know that we've got to keep our employees, and it's 75% of the funding has to be used for our payroll. But our payroll can't include contract workers. They have to be employees. And I'm not going to get into workplace fraud, even though it's super tempting. It's my favorite topic. But if you have contract workers, those are not included in the employee payroll calculation. And it's against the Workplace Fraud Act anyway, so you shouldn't be doing it. So you can't use them. And then another thing that's come up is ensure that your certification is accurate. So when you apply for the loan, you get the loan document, and when you sign off on it, it's got some certifications in it. And you want to make sure that you read it. I know everyone listening to this has read it in detail, but you got to make sure that your certification is accurate. A lot of folks are just relying on their bankers for the advice on how to do it and what it means, and I don't blame you for that, because other than some frequently asked questions on the SBA website, there's not a ton of information out there, so you're relying on what your banker tells you. But your banker, your lender, is not going to be liable if you make a mistake or you certify something that's not accurate. You're going to be liable. So just be careful about, well, so-and-so at risk has said. You got to make sure and do your own investigation and make sure that you're certifying something that's accurate, that your own information is accurate. Another thing that's come up is in your certification, you have to state for your loan that you took into account the ability to access other sources of liquidity and that the loan is necessary. And so a lot of folks have asked questions, well, does that mean that I have to use up my line of credit? Do I have to max it out? If I have a company credit card, do I have to max that out? And there's not a clear answer on that point because all we have right now is that language from the SBA frequently asked questions that says you have to take into account this, but there's supposed to be additional guidance coming out. And the prevailing thought is that the government's not going to say that you have to use a line of credit or you have to max out a credit card with a much higher interest rate in order to qualify for a loan with this lower interest rate. Maintain records. Okay, so just as a general matter, right, you want to maintain records, but specifically, you want to maintain, we talked about here in part of your certification, you had to certify that the loan was a necessity for you to continue business operations. You want to make sure you're maintaining records of lost revenue, lack of liquidity, and any other business conditions that you've experienced that made the loan necessary. Make sure that you have that in a file. And then, of course, you want to maintain records of how the funds are spent. A lot of people are recommending a separate account, separate ledger entries, because our E here, prepare for an audit. The government is saying they will audit anyone whose loan is over $2 million, but you never know if you're going to fall into one of that other general category of random people they decided to audit. So maintain records as if you knew you were going to be audited, and make sure you have documentation that the costs, that the loan proceeds were paid for acceptable disbursements, and that you have records that you needed the loan. There's this HEROES Act that passed in the House that may expand the time frame for when the funds can be used and reduce that 75% payroll requirement. But I don't know if it's going to pass the Senate. A lot of buzz on that. So as of right now, we're stuck with the PPP as it exists. I suspect there's going to be some more relief coming, but as of the date of this seminar, we don't have any other information. All right. Another topic I wanted to talk about is worker safety and job site impacts. So this is just going to be a little bit of, here are the guidelines and here are things to look out for. I know you all are continuing to work, so you're seeing these already yourself out on the job sites. But, if a worker or a visitor has symptoms, they're going to be asked to leave, obviously, and go home. Sick and unnecessary visitors are going to be prohibited from a job site. Companies are already doing it and may decide that they want to start taking temperatures at work sites, or requiring that employees take their temperature before they come to the job and report that daily. Workers have to avoid physical contact and then 6 foot spacing. Now, that just creates a host of issues for, especially those trades where workers work in tandem. But like I said, if you've got a job elevator or hoist that you're using regularly, how do you deal with that? So that's creating real issues on the job site. Meetings are limited, right? So safety meetings are supposed to be virtual. And if you can have job site meetings virtual, that's encouraged. If you can't do that, you've got to have that 6 foot spacing outside if possible. Other things that have been proposed are staggered breaks, staggered shifts, reducing the size of any group working in an area, obviously, as limited as possible. You want to limit the sharing of tools, disinfect the tools, limit, if you can have one person driving to work at a time or in a work truck, you want to do that. If you can't, you've got to disinfect the truck. No shared drinking water, and bring your own water to work, right? Instead of having jugs or anything like that available. That implicates hand washing. How do we have water for employees to wash hands? And if we can't have that in a safe, restricted way, then we have to have hand sanitizer available at all times, on the job site, in common areas, in the toilets, all the time. And we've got added PPE. So in addition to the PPE that you're already wearing, the CDC is recommending you wear gloves all the time, you wear eye protection, you wear the N95 mask. So make sure you're as protected as you can be. And then rigorous housekeeping. And so what does that mean? That is implicating issues like how frequently are we cleaning the trailers and the break areas, the elevators, the stairs that everyone's using? Do we have a crew that's just circulating all day, wiping down surfaces? They're specifically recommending that you collect trash with gloves, which I can't believe people aren't doing that already, but okay. How often are you cleaning the job site toilets? I think they're recommending at least once a week. I'll reserve comment on that. Commenting cleaning vehicles, cleaning tools, all that at least once a day. So making sure that you are dealing with rigorous cleaning standards. As the GC or as the owner on the job, how does that impact your costs? So I'll click on Petrone again because Steve's here. what are you experiencing in terms of how much you're paying to clean your office buildings, how much are you paying to clean the job site, to maintain those hand sanitizer stations, to have somebody roaming around constantly cleaning and wiping. I mean, that's a real cost to the job. So how do we pass that on? That's a consideration. Can we pass that on to the owner as a requirement? And then, in addition to just the cleanliness, is how do we keep the workers safe? How do we keep them protected from becoming sick, becoming infected? OSHA has been great, and ABC has been great about putting out information on how do we deal with the job site, how do we keep our workers safe. So this is just the recent alert that came out about how to deal with your workers and recommendations. One thing to mention is COVID-19 is a reportable illness. So if you have a COVID illness with one of your employees, it is an OSHA reported sickness. If it's a confirmed case of COVID-19, and if it's work related, do they get it at work? Do they contract it at work? Were they exposed at work? And it involves one or more of the general reporting criteria set in the CFR section, which if it's a COVID-19, it does. So just be aware that you have to report that if someone comes down with COVID or is exposed on your job site. In terms of safety, something else to consider is who is responsible for safety. So again, we go back to the AIA because it's a great balanced contract and is used across the industry. And this provides that the contractor, so the sub, is responsible for safety on the job. The contractor has to take precautions for their employees and anyone affected by their employees. The work, other adjacent properties, so you're responsible to keep your workers safe. So just because the chimney pollen is requiring everybody that shows up on the job to take their temperature, or just because Pet Marrow is making everyone wash their hands every 5 minutes, you as the sub are still responsible for your own worker safety and keeping them safe. Now, to use the example I just used, if the owner takes on some of that responsibility themselves, they can be buying some of the liability. And I'm always talking to clients about risk allocation, and we know that owners want to push risk down to the contractor, to the GC, and the GC wants to push all the risk down to the subcontractor. But if the GC or the owner is assuming some of that responsibility, either under the contract or just because that's the procedures they're undertaking, and they may be buying some of that liability away from the subcontractor. So that's an issue to be aware of. And that's it for me. Those are some of the hot topics I wanted to cover. I talked a lot faster than I expected to. But are there any questions anyone has about these issues or anything else, since we have some time?
Does anybody have any questions? If you have a question, go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Don't everybody go at once.
I don't really have any question, but Vicky, you did a great job, and it was very informative. And we're experiencing a lot of what you just touched on. One thing that you mentioned, so if in one of your documents you had that if a worker on a job site has the symptoms, he's asked to leave. Now, we've shut jobs down. We've had one job that had 2 cases of individuals that have been, one that possibly had it and one that his wife possibly had it, and they both came to our job site, and we shut the whole job site down.
Yeah.
Is that what we're supposed to do, not supposed to do? I mean,
well, that's the safest course for sure.
Yeah.
The other alternatives, it's like this contact tracing, right? Can you figure out where the worker's been and who the worker exposed themselves to, who was exposed in that area, and then send those folks home. I mean, that's a hard, difficult undertaking. So the safest thing is to shut the job down. And
Yeah,
again,
that's what we did. We shut the job down. We sanitized the facility and then waited until they were here to clear 14 days and brought them back.
Yep.
Anybody else? Mike? You have something?
Yeah, Pat Ryan.
Pat?
Yeah, Vicky, are you seeing any of these claims being made at this time in Delaware?
Absolutely. Yeah, delay claims, you mean?
Yes.
Yes. So mostly it's, we think there's going to be an issue. We're not exactly sure what the impact is. We've heard from material suppliers that something's coming. But specific impact, I haven't really seen yet because Delaware was so open, continue to be so open with construction. And it's
Right.
more with lead time for materials or a specialty contractor coming in from the other state. There's one project where there was a specialty company coming from Massachusetts to do this wastewater related issue, and they just couldn't get here for 3 weeks. So fortunately, that wasn't on the critical path, but we're going to start seeing those things roll in. And then the other thing I didn't really touch on is, jobs being shut down. So all your contracts have a clause in it that say the owner can shut the job down for his convenience. And so, we've had, I think in the Delaware Prosperity Survey, in 30%, it might even be higher, of the respondents say that they had jobs canceled or just shut down or postponed. And so, what's the impact of that? I am seeing a lot of that.
Thank you.
So Vicky, I got another question for you. So on the force majeure, we actually were doing a job with Christiana Care when all this happened. And we did have to send a letter to them regarding the force majeure with delays, because in Pennsylvania, facilities shut down where we were getting products, we couldn't get them. So that pertained to that. Now we have new jobs coming up, and I'm writing in my contracts that all my subcontractors have to follow CDC guidelines, and that we will not be responsible for any delay damages or because of the COVID-19. So it's not force majeure anymore because it's now known. How do you see that playing out?
Yep, that's a great point. And in all the contracts that I review, that I do now, I'm specifically adding that. Things like that, like epidemic or specific government restrictions on travel and activity. If that kind of language is in there, I'm putting it in there so that it's specifically covered, and that disclaiming of liability for any related delays is a great practice point as well. I'm glad you brought that up. Yep.
Hey, Vicky, back to Steve's first point about an employee has COVID-19.
Yep.
HIPAA, how's that playing? He's working with 5 other guys.
Yeah.
Now you have an illness. So what about, how does HIPAA play into that as far as notifying, letting them know what's going on?
Right. So, you want to protect the employee's privacy. So it's more a question of an employee was exposed, not Len Brooks was exposed, right? So that's the balance you have to do. And that exactly goes to Steve's point, which is, are we shutting the job down, or are we just trying to isolate who this person came into contact with? That's a delicate balance.
All right.
Yep.
Anybody have anything else?
Thanks, Vicky.
Okay.
Vicky, great job.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on, Vicky. We appreciate it. As I said, you'll get a copy of the slide presentation to you in an email from Jean. And we hope all of you remain safe and healthy. And we'll see you soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Good day.
Thanks, Ed.